A friend and I recently decided we wanted to give the Halo games another playthrough. We were both huge fans of the series when the original trilogy was at the forefront of gaming on the original Xbox and eventually the Xbox 360. It had been going on 10 years or so since we'd played through the campaigns in co-op together, so we thought why not go through them again in chronological order and have some fun. To that end, we started with Halo Reach, which despite being the 5th Halo game released, if you exclude Halo Wars and I Will Be, is actually the first game in the narrative. The game itself is almost solely a prequel to Halo Combat Evolved. Whilst its story really only exists to set up that game, it is a fantastic story in its own right. The game takes place in the month or so running up to Halo Combat Evolved and follows Noble Team, a Spec Ops fireteam made up of Spartans, which are humanity's genetically and technologically enhanced super soldiers. You take the role of a newcomer to the team after a previous member's death and join the defense of the planet Reach during the Covenant invasion. Now, if you know anything about Halo lore, you'll be well aware that the human colony on Reach doesn't exactly live a long and prosperous life following the resolution of the war. In fact, it's almost a legendary tale in later games that the planet was utterly destroyed during the invasion and turned into a superheated glass marble by the genocidal alien intruders. This sets the story up with an odd tone. You already know that this can only end one way, but the question is, what can you do in the meantime to influence this little piece of Halo history? The game starts with nobody seemingly aware of the impending Covenant invasion, and Bungie spends a bit of time building up that tension in the first mission, with a mysterious disappearance of a few infantry teams sent to investigate a communications relay that was taken offline unexpectedly. Even when you're aware that the Covenant are on the planet and you're fighting them, each mission slowly reveals more and more the immense scale of the invasion taking place right under our noses. By the time we're allowed to realise the true scale of the Covenant invasion fleet, we're already fighting a losing battle. Reach has a masterfully crafted ability to give you that feeling of joy and elation when the UNSC defeats a large threat in the campaign, only to shatter it moments later by revealing how inconsequential that small victory really is. This happens so many times during the campaign, it even begins to make you the player feel as though your hope for victory is fading. Every hard-fought objective you complete is complemented by uncountable losses. These losses are sometimes not even communicated to you directly, instead you see them sprawled across the environment as you traverse to your next objective. What I think is one of Reach's strongest elements is its ability to make the player truly feel the hopelessness of the situation at hand. In contrast to the previous games, Halo Reach doesn't have a grand storyline that results in your Spartans single-handedly saving the universe. Instead, it's a story about survivors battling for the last hope of humanity, a story of loss and sacrifice. The only thing I can think of comparing this to is my first time watching Star Wars and getting to The Empire Strikes Back or even Revenge of the Sith, in that you reach the ending and just have this pit in your stomach because the bad guys are winning. It's probably the darkest game in the series when it comes to theme, but I think that is what makes it so refreshing. The visuals of Halo Reach are honestly stunning. Provided this game was built on the design and experience gained by Bungie from the first 4 installments, but it was a treat for the eyes back in 2010, and I'm happy to say it still holds up 13 years later. Environments are extremely detailed and each level has its own distinctive theme, which makes them just as iconic as any of the fan favourite missions from the original trilogy. Their environments and their backdrops are skillfully crafted and really lend themselves to the scale of the conflict. Some of the scenery is so beautiful. I remember playing this back in 2010 and spending a long time just watching the battles in the distance. It all serves as a reminder of how small a role you play in this huge historical battle. As a side note, I was playing this on my PC via the Master Chief Collection, which doesn't have a remastered version of Reach per se, but it runs at a higher resolution and frame rate than the original Xbox 360 version, and now includes temporal anti-aliasing to get rid of those jagged edges. I wouldn't say it's mind-blowingly different, and the core game still looks the same as it did when it was released, though some people may say otherwise. I just wanted to include this for clarity. I couldn't talk about Halo without talking about the soundtrack. Halo as a series is well known for its famous main theme, and every game in the series has had its fair share of great tracks, and Reach is no exception. The game nails that heart-pounding action music with powerful percussion instrumentals and electronic elements. But in keeping with the darker theme, is also littered with eerie orchestral arrangements and choir vocals that pick up during those moments of despair. Marty O'Donnell, the man behind much of the music from previous Halo games, was also present for the development of Reach and wanted to make the soundtrack grittier and darker than his past work, and I would say that it was a job very well done. The soundtrack of Reach certainly stands out from the original trilogy. There seems to be some opinions floating around that Reach has the worst soundtrack of all the Halo games, but I think this is slightly disingenuous. Got to remember that what Halo Combat Evolved through to 3 did to the gaming industry was unheard of up until that point, and the games themselves contain huge amounts of unforgettable music that is now tied to a lot of kids' rose-tinted memories of the series. That's not to say that old Halo music wasn't good, in fact it's very much the opposite. I believe that the music was so good and so deeply tied to people's experience of this era of gaming that nothing that came afterwards could ever beat that, even if it came from Marty O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore themselves. However, I would argue to the hilt that Reach's soundtrack is one of the greats of the series and a fitting theme to the gloomy backdrop that is the fall of Reach. From the beginning, it's clear that Bungie really learned how to create a cinematic story in this installment. The abundant cutscenes are well thought out, ranging from sweeping aerial views of battles to up-close and personal shots during character exchanges. There are plenty of really artsy shots too, cameras attached to vehicles, helmet cams, first-person viewpoints during action sequences, and shots from surveillance cameras and satellites. It's the kind of camera work that I don't think is present in any of the games prior to this one either, besides the surveillance cameras in ODST, which aids the idea that you're almost looking back on a historical event through the eyes of those who experienced it. The story of Reach that Bungie wanted to present is clearly that of a personal one, and having so many of these in-world camera angles serves that purpose well. With regards to gameplay, Halo Reach takes the same tried and tested formula of the previous games and adds its own tweaks here and there. Though the core gameplay will be very familiar to any fans of the series, there are some nice new additions with armor abilities that can add some interesting tactics to fights, particularly in PvP, as well as some new weapons and vehicles. Assassinations are also a cool addition that rewards you for meleeing someone from behind with a nicely made animation that makes you look like a badass and humiliates your opponent. One very noticeable thing that I came across in this recent playthrough is just how damn good the AI is. Seriously, I was completely taken aback by how fun the fights felt on heroic difficulty. The Covenant are fun and challenging to fight against, the elites were really tough, they took a lot of damage and would frequently roll out the way of threats, or fall back to better positions and let their underlings deal with you whilst they attack from afar. The Grunts and Jackals would attempt to keep you pinned whilst another flanked around to your side. The vehicles were tough too. Banshees would punish you from above if you weren't paying attention, and Wraiths would bombard you from afar with a huge AoE damage plasma mortar. I don't think I ever appreciated it enough, but Reach's AI made playing through the campaign a weirdly tactical experience, and I think playing this in co-op was made even more fun by it. There were times where one of us would have to distract an enemy so we could close the distance, otherwise we would be quickly cut down. One such instance was fighting a hunter, a near invincible hulking beast with only one weak point on its body, its rear. Unfortunately, it wouldn't give you a shot that easily, and any attempt to get close to it usually resulted in you getting smacked into a wall. In co-op, one of us would try and draw the hunter's attention, whilst the other got in close and blasted him with a trusty shotgun. All of this makes what is essentially the traditional Halo shooting gallery a dynamic affair packed with hilarious potential moments when playing with friends too. I think this also helps instill a little bit of fear into the player that contributes to that feeling of hopelessness I mentioned before. The Covenant are not some pushovers that you can lone wolf your way through with ease. Cunning and brutal, and will happily punish you for your mistakes if they get the chance. The campaign itself is chock full of unique experiences, and no mission ever felt like a reskin of another. You can go from sneaking around on a covert mission in the dead of night with active camo and snipers, to assaulting a Covenant position with a Scorpion, to flying across the ruined New Alexandria skyline in the rain, to piloting a spacefaring jet destroying Covenant ships in the orbit of Reach. Some of these newer sandbox experiences definitely had the potential to feel like gimmicks as part of Bungie's last Halo outing, but here, each of them serve a purpose for the story and are really good fun in their own right. The space sequences are both a visual treat and a nice change of pace, whereas the missions piloting your own Falcon are a haunting piece of the story and also a good example of how sandbox missions can still be tight experiences without being too bloated. Reach was, at the time, the only campaign that included cooperation with other living Spartans. These characters help drive the story forward and are full of memorable lines that give us insights into who they are. The team interacting with each other is a nice touch and a good break between missions. It's clear that they all have their own personalities, skills and perspectives on their mission, the war and the UNSC, but are ultimately interested in the preservation of everyone in the team and the completion of their objectives. The fact that you play through the game with a team only serves to enhance the emotional resonance of the story. I wish that there had been more time for us to get to know these characters, as they're all compelling characters in the short time that the player gets to know them. But as the story progresses and we feel the emotional pain of losing some of them, it's hard not to feel a little bit of an outsider to this tightly knit group. I don't know how much of this comes from your character being an outsider, or you as a player being unaware of the team's previous experiences together. Either way, the characters are well made and well acted. I only wish we could have seen more of them. Halo Reach also launched with the traditional team versus team multiplayer that arguably gave the original trilogy its cult following. It also brought back the Forge mode that was snuck into Halo 3 in the final weeks of development. The multiplayer in Reach is standard. It's simple, as all Halo PvP usually is, but the formula works so well, and even without the complications of more modern shooters, the experiences I had in Reach multiplayer both 13 years ago and today are some of the best I've ever had. The mix of unique weapons and gadgets, interesting maps, and a plethora of vehicles really make Halo multiplayer matches some of the most interesting around, and even today Reach is no different. Reach also took the liberty of introducing some new modes too, with one of my personal favourites being Invasion. Huge maps, multiple phases of objectives, and lots of vehicles for all-out carnage. That's just the pinnacle of Halo multiplayer in my opinion. Bungie also expanded the Spartan customization system drastically for Reach, which was a big thumbs up in my books and gave even more reason to grind out the fun multiplayer experience. Having your unique Spartan appear in the campaign too was also a nice bonus. Forge's second outing also introduced a whole bundle of cool toys for map makers to play around with, including precision building tools, effects and vehicles. I haven't had the chance to play many custom games on the Master Chief Collection version as of yet, but I used to spend hours building maps and playing ridiculous game modes with friends back in the day. Tools are all still there in this version though, and anyone with a few friends or a community could have a blast messing around in Forge even to this day. Bungie also re-added the Firefight mode from ODST, which was another fun way to buddy up and kill some Covenant in a horde-like game mode. They even adopted to add a PvPvE mode, where two players could become elites and try to disrupt the defending team. Again, I haven't had much of a chance to play it recently, but back in the day this was a really fun way to spend a few hours trying to beat your previous high score. Between the campaign, firefight, multiplayer, forge, and theatre, it's safe to say that Reach has enough content to keep you occupied for a long time. Overall, I think this is one of the best games to come out of the 2010s and potentially one of the best games of all time, even riding on the back of such a hugely successful series. It recounts a mythical event in the Halo timeline with beautiful visuals, interesting characters and environments, and a hauntingly emotional story. I'm trying very hard not to be blinded by nostalgia, but going back to this game has just reminded me how much of a masterpiece I think it is. If you haven't had a chance to play it yet, it's a good place to get into Halo and it's absolutely worth the money today. Anyway, thank you for watching, I'll see you in the next one.
Oh, suicide guns! No!
Oh, I don't know why I thought driving into them
Yeah.
and putting the grenades down.